All right, the story of the kidnapping of the four Moti brothers gripped South Africa. The four children from a family involved in business have since been released, but all involved are remaining mum or sketchy about whether or not a ransom was paid. This raises a bigger issue. Kidnapping is becoming big business in South Africa. The SABC knows of at least one businessman who paid multiple millions to be released, and he said he was warned for the safety of him and his family not to make the details public. To discuss, we're now joined by Kidnapping and Extortion Manager for TSU International, Herman Bosman, and Manager of the Crime and Justice Information Hub at the Institute of Security Studies, Lizette Lancaster. Thank you very much both for your time. Mr. Bosman, let me start with you. How many kidnappings are we seeing, and what are the trends over time?
Well, we're currently looking at close to 7,000 kidnappings annually reported and still growing. The figure is around 6,800 precise as from the police's stats. And that, as we know, is not a correct picture, as many incidents are not reported and many incidents are also included in other crimes. It has been growing substantially over the last 10 years to an alarming rate.
What do you have to say, Ms. Lancaster? Do you agree the rate of increase is alarming, and many of these stories don't get out because it's kept under wraps?
Absolutely. So we saw a 133% increase in that decade that was referred to. And most alarmingly, since we have emerged from the second wave for the crime stats in the first quarter of this financial year, released by the police, that's for April, May and June this year, we saw over 2,227 kidnappings, and those are only the ones reported to the police. That is, in that 3 months, the same number that was reported in 2008. So that's a staggering increase as we emerge from this pandemic.
Staying with you, Ms. Lancaster, anti-crime activist Yusuf Abranji says most of these kidnappings are for ransom. Do we know that for sure?
According to the police's reported statistics, and again, as Mr. Bosman pointed out, we don't know the number that's not reported and recorded by the police. But around roughly just under half are actually the result of kidnappings because of commission of a robbery, a hijacking. So people are driven around after being hijacked or the victim of an armed robbery in order to withdraw cash and such. But we know that about 5% of the dockets that the police analysed was the result of the modus operandi, or the reason for the kidnapping was extortion or for ransom, and another 5% for revenge. So these might sound like small numbers, but when we translate them into our daily reported stats, we're looking at around one a day just for extortion or ransom, and that again are the ones reported to the police. Many are not.
Yeah, sure. That's incredible. Mr. Bosman, so driving somebody around and then saying, go and draw all the cash you have from an ATM is different from targeting business people, and maybe this was an unusual case where the children of a business person seem to have been targeted. That is high level, high planning. How much of that is going on?
Well, that is the concern that I have, is that what we've seen over the years is the sophistication and the level of force and planning that goes into the kidnappings that we see more and more is alarming. It's definitely sophisticated gangs, sophisticated syndicates that's becoming more apparent, also copycats locally in South Africa, and not necessarily always from abroad. So there is a growing concern, and an asserted effort should definitely be taken to curb this. It cannot continue like this.
Yeah, so these are kidnapping gangs honing their skills?
Well, yes. Obviously, as we discuss this now, there's a growing concern because they are making money. You've started a program highlighting the payment that has been received by these groups, and that definitely fuels the problem.
Ms. Lancaster, do you agree? Let's talk about the conditions in South Africa that have led to this incredible rise. I think you said 133% increase in the number of kidnappings, and we're just talking about reported, correct me if I'm wrong, over a decade.
That's correct. And we are seeing that it's often gangs that have maybe been involved in other crimes. For instance, there are some assertions, for instance, in Cape Town with the kidnapping of some business people, especially foreign shop owners, that are being targeted. And it seems to be that some of the gangs that used to be in the nightclub protection racket extortion game have now, with the lockdowns and the curfews and the lack of nightlife type of businesses, have now morphed into other daytime or targeting daytime businesses, such as small emerging businesses, especially run by foreigners. In places like KwaZulu-Natal, we know that there have been several incidents of rich business people being targeted and even moved across borders. The same in Gauteng, where about a third of the reported kidnappings happen. So sometimes it's children for leverage, sometimes it's the business owners themselves.
And Mr. Bosman, you said there's reason to be alarmed here. How alarmed should we be as a nation? I mean, you hear stories of Colombia in the old days where business people, foreigners, their kids had to have bodyguards 24/7 because kidnappings were so rife. Where's it going? How worrying is this for South Africa?
Well, we certainly far from the comparison to Colombia. My concern, though, is that it is growing and that we should definitely plan together. This is a very complicated crime. This is not an easy type of exercise to do all the planning. And from the government side, from NGOs, from companies like ours, we need to sit together, we need to plan, and we need to, from our side, implement strategy to work against this. Also, the public should be more aware of it, not ignoring the threat, but recognizing that it is real, it is out there, and we need to take responsibility for safety in our actions. As I say, we are far from the situation, as you referred to Colombia, but we cannot allow it to grow to that. Kidnapping is not a typical South African crime. Over the years, it's grown to become more and more of a concern. But if we look back in the 90s, we've never had an issue or problem with this. Statistically, if you look at it, it was very, very low at that time. But it has grown to something that is the concern.
So what is the strategy? I mean, are you talking about crime prevention there, something we should do on that level, or the strategy that I guess wealthy families should have, knowing that they could be targets? What can people do?
Well, collectively, investigative ability must be enhanced. There's various things that I obviously wouldn't like to say on air and discuss, but certainly to take care of where does this happen? What can you do from your side to make sure that all your information is not that available? But the use of social media is a big concern to me. I can find out so much on social media, and research are done before people are taken, and it's all out there on social media. Also, if we look at where people are taken, mostly en route whilst traveling from work, home, or other way around, that is where the majority of incidents do occur, and we should be alert to that fact.
Ms. Lancaster, do you agree? And what do you have in terms of solutions? I mean, social media is a big one, we know, for pedophiles as well, getting information on children, on where they are.
Yes, sexual offences is part of this kidnapping proportionality. I mean, it makes up about 27% of kidnappings reported to the police. I think we need to identify that there are different motives for these kidnappings. Some are more personal friends that might be doing this, but as pointed out, we need to worry about the organised crime syndicates that are starting to move in this very lucrative type of business venture. And they are very organized and they have resources. The only way to deal with this is a collective effort through intelligence gathering and stuff, and network interruption. You have to understand and study and map these networks. There are huge networks, for instance, in the Western Cape, that are known, and you need to start linking the different kidnappings with one another, the modus operandis and such. And the police do need extra resources because this is such a growing matter. They cannot be on top of it alone. I mean, they have done quite well in certain instances. We've seen some successes of the Hawks, for instance, but with the growth in the number of kidnappings and the growing number of syndicates involved.
Yeah, so Ms. Lancaster,
really
final question. You're talking about crime intelligence. So the same authorities that should have known about the July unrest and maybe been more effective there, also dealing with kidnapping. It's about collecting evidence on these gangs on the ground.
Absolutely. We must remember that crime intelligence was captured, and a lot of what we saw play out in July was also not just an inability and failure, but also political games. So we need a complete overhaul of crime intelligence, but we also need good leadership at the top. We have seen that not being the case, or good leaders being removed, and capacity being rebuilt. It is clear that the political games and the self-interest has been at the center of crime intelligence. But there are still many good men and women out there, and we just need to rebuild the capacity.
All right, thank you very much to you both. That was Lizette Lancaster from the Institute for Security Studies and Herman Bosman from TSU International.